Okay. Hi, everyone. Happy Saturday. So I'm Tracey. I am the theater teacher and current director at Truman High School in Levittown, Pennsylvania. It's right outside of, literally right outside of Philadelphia. A lot of people say that, but we could spit on Philadelphia. That's how close. Interestingly enough, I just shared a photo from earlier. I was at Ball State in 1993, so I have no idea how old you guys were in June of 1993, or if you might not have even been born. What's interesting and how Jake had touched base with me is my theater teacher and high school director is who I took over for. I took over the program, and I was very, very fortunate to have him as a teacher, director, peer, friend, and mentor. And he was who the book Drama High was about, and then Lou, and then who Jeffrey Seller purchased the rights to the book, and then it inspired the short-lived television series, Rise. So that's kind of a little bit of my background. So I have been teaching theater for 23 years. I took over the program in 2013 when Lou retired. So I was his assistant from 2006 on, and then took over the program since he retired. So today I think we're going to kind of address taking over a program and working forward that way. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm just making sure.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So just a little bit about me is I started out as an elementary education major, which makes absolutely no sense, but in Pennsylvania, there is no certification to be a theater teacher. So most people in Pennsylvania that are theater teachers, are actually English teachers or course teachers that kind of get thrown into the theater aspect. So I was an elementary education major, but I told Lou when I graduated high school that I was coming back to take his job, not out of, any ill wishes, but because of basically what he had inspired me to do and kind of encouraged me to do. I was involved in a lot of different activities, good and bad, in high school. And theater just was something I kind of liked and fell into, and then was really encouraged by Lou for something to pursue. And I knew that I wanted to pursue education. Not that I didn't want to do acting, but that kind of just wasn't in the forefront. I did do some acting in college and things like that, but it was interesting to me because Lou said as a theater educator, you recognize when your time is up and where it's about the kids and not you. Lou was never an actor. He's actually never been on stage ever in his life. He hates public speaking. Oh, there's a delay. Oh, for 1 or 2 minutes. Uh-oh. Okay. Like a major delay? Okay. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the chat. So one thing that I learned, and I don't know if this is your experience in your group, whether you're going into education or theater, but kind of understanding about being a part of the process and how it's about the process. And that's something that as an educator, I've really, really taken away from, that it's no longer my time on the stage and it's about the kids. So I see a lot, and it's probably might not be able to say this, but I see a lot of educators who went into theater education to kind of extend their time in the limelight versus it being about the program, the kids, and spreading what I feel is such an important part of a child's upbringing is the arts and integrating it into all subject areas and into who they are and kind of bringing some kids out of their creative shells. So for me, I see it as a little bit different. I feel that theater should be a standard curriculum in all high schools because part of why Lou's program was so successful was because of the theater classes, because you would get a kid that walks past the room and sees the comfy chairs and the couches, and here's kids having fun in a room that says, I want to try that. And then they get into that. You're getting these kids out of the woodwork so much earlier, and an opportunity for them to see, well, if I can do this in class in front of 25 people, why not go audition? So in that sense, we're very fortunate that our program has classes. So I teach theater 1, 2, 3, and 4. And there's another teacher who teaches theater 1. And this year I have an honors theater production, so a weighted class of kids that are 10th through 12th. And since it's weighted, like obviously academically, you know, you get some of those kids that typically would go all to AP class a bit earlier. So I'm very fortunate where I teach that Lou built such a strong program and that we're able to continue with it. And Jake had mentioned that he wanted me to talk about taking over for someone and kind of stepping into shoes and the process of doing that, which is still, it's been a month that goes by that I don't hear, well, you're not Lou. And just kind of being, you know, treated a little bit different because there's the concept of like the old guard and people not wanting to let go of, you know, how Lou might have done stuff or things that I do a little bit different. And one thing I do want to touch on that I find interesting that people don't talk about, it's really how jealous other educators and other teachers are of theater directors and educators. Because, and it's not in the book, I wish it was, there's kind of like a little mention that there's a third teacher that teaches theater. They no longer teach theater. They tried to take my job, so I wouldn't get it when Lou retired. And they had started a whole letter writing campaign, how they needed to get the job. So there was like, the book couldn't get printed until we knew that I was definitely getting the job. So, and because the board was confused, like who was this other person saying that they should get the job, because it was another alumni that teaches with me, that still teaches with me. It's fantastic. So that is something that I feel a lot of people going into, whether you're directing at a community theater or you're directing at a high school or you're teaching and directing at a high school, is that there are going to be a number of people that are very envious. They'll show it in a completely different way, but are very envious of the connection and relationships that you can have with students and with parents in the community. Whereas if, depending on their subject area, they don't get to have. And it's, listen, they could have picked to be a theater teacher. But it's just one of those things that you don't realize that sometimes some of the tension or struggle or challenges that you might be facing as a director or an educator are really because people are just green with envy. And it's something that you kind of have to take a step back from. And, you know, you might be looking at yourself like, well, what do I need to do? Or what can I try to do? And to eventually realize that sometimes you just can't. And that you also have to understand as a theater educator that 90% of the people you work with will have no idea what you do. They'll think that you just play, you just watch movies all the time and play games, and they don't realize that there is an absolute method to the madness that makes kids better in their classes. You know, and that's something that I always appreciate when teachers come up to me and say, because I'll send out like a copy of the program and like a copy of the cast list to when we're doing a show, and how many people will come up to me and say, that kid doesn't talk in my class. You know, I'm like, well, they don't shut up in theater class. Like, it's just a very, very different environment. And it does. It makes teachers, you know, envious and jealous, like all at the same time. And one tip I'm just going to throw out there, and then I'm not sure if you want me to kind of direct it a different way because I have tons of stuff to talk about. But my school and my district does not recognize like grading PIAA for like theater. So I send out a list and I want to know academically like how they're doing, because I feel that if they are spending all this time after school and on Saturdays, they're spending all this time with me, their first job is to be a student. So that kind of shows like the level of respect. I think I'm not lagging on this one.
Yes, that's perfect.
We got you now.
Chromebooks. I probably shouldn't do that, but all right, there we go. Okay. A lot better now. I was like, why am I? And then I'm like, I'm a different color on this one. Yay. Okay. Now I'm just at a different angle. Okay. So, just to talk about taking over a program, and Jake, you can interrupt at any point if you want me to talk about something specific. Um, but taking over a program that has been well established, I think, is difficult regardless of where anyone is. And if you haven't worked under the person, I can imagine that it's probably even more difficult. So it's just kind of finding an ally within the building as like your sounding board for how things used to go. Now, for me, even though I knew Lou and everything like that, the athletic director's secretary is the person to go to. Usually it's an athletic or activities director or an assistant principal who might be in charge of like to explain like budgeting and things like that to kind of know the lay of the land. I never understood until I was Lou's assistant that, you know, applying for rights and the process for that and establishing relationships with different licensing companies and, you know, what Lou did that maybe wasn't always the best tactic, or things I didn't know that like I kind of had to reach out to him and be like, wait a minute, you did this. Or the secretary that did all the billing was like, no, this is how Lou did it. Things that I don't understand. So just to give you an idea, our school doesn't have the best budget for co-curricular and or for even co-curricular staffing. So some districts, particularly districts around me, they have someone who gets paid just to do plays. They have someone who gets paid to do the producing. They have someone who does just the musical. They have a paid position for a costumer. They have someone who handles their programs. We do. It's just all me. So, you know, having that math teacher who can do like stitching and like, you know, sew stuff like during their prep, like that's the things to kind of find out. The first thing I learned very, very quickly is that it is not a weakness to ask for help. So if I needed crazy costume supplies or if people were cleaning out stuff and I knew a show that I was going to do, that was the first thing I did was reach out to the faculty and kind of, and no matter what, and it's the silliest little thing, is putting a thank you in the program. Like if they've donated, you know, shirts or, you know, just anything to kind of reach out and thank them in some way. We used to do comp tickets for our faculty, but then it got like a little bit crazy. So if someone donates something or donates their time, like kind of repaying them back that way with tickets, whether it's for them or for a family member to kind of branch out. But going in and taking over a program blind, I can't even fathom. But going in and taking over a successful program has its own challenges. So, you know, Lou was able to get away with whatever he wanted, literally. Literally, the man could do anything and the community would fawn all over it. He would have, like when we did Aida, like, and it just frustrates me to no end, but when we did Aida, the male slaves, which is horrible for me to say, but in the show, Lou had them in these little tiny like bikini bathing suits, these high school boys. And all these women were buying tickets to sit in the front row to see like all the, it was horrible to see all these high school boys. I do honeymoon in Vegas. Called me in to tell me that I cast too many large breasted females in the, she's female in the show, and that I now need to ask bra size on my audition card. So I was like, well, that's illegal. And no, I'm not going to do that. I do. That's actually interesting, Scholar, that you're asking that. I absolutely do think that it's because I'm a woman. And what's interesting, my principals have always been male. And that kind of gauges up and down. So you face a lot of those challenges. And I've just kind of, at this point, we have a new school board president and he likes me, and the vice president, she likes me. She actually, the school board voted down me doing Chicago because they watched the movie and thought I was just going to have everyone dressed naked. But they never had a conversation with me. And the vice president is who made them revote and said, like, people know the show and things like that. So it's nice when you kind of have like an ally to go in there with you.
but I kind of like when people don't like me. Like I sometimes I encourage it, which it I don't help it any because I kind of like it. I'm like whatever. Um like even when they were doing the TV show stuff, I had to take unpaid days to go to the set because it had nothing to do with work. So, but stepping into the show, and this has been a very, very interesting relationship with Lou and I, because I'll get off tangent if you don't remind me. I'll just go off everywhere. It's been very difficult for Lou because he wants to support me and wants to support the program, but he also doesn't want to step on my toes. So he was my teacher and we are very close. We, talk all the time. If I don't hear from him during the week, it's like something's wrong and I'm like, texting to find out what's going on. So it's one of those things that we have more of like a familial relationship, but he does come to every show and he takes notes and I read the notes to the kids. So they love it because they like all know who he is. And it's funny because he actually has become a guest speaker for my classes to come back and like they all love it and things like that, like whether their parents had him or older siblings or things like that. So I do like keeping him involved that way because he's retired, like he's not doing anything. And he had health issues once he retired. And it's because they say that men typically when they retire don't plan ahead, whereas women are planners. And he had 3 strokes literally within 3 months of retiring. And they said at Penn, they said it's because you went from 110 to nothing. And they said like it's the way your brain functions and all kinds of stuff. So I try to keep him involved a lot in a lot of different things that I do. When I was teaching this honors class, they called me 2 days before school started and said, we never got your college board pre-AP theater stuff, so you can't teach that class. You have to rewrite the curriculum before school starts in 2 days. So I called Lou and I said, let's create the theater class of our dreams. And him and I, the whole first half of the year was musicals, and now we're in our second half, which is all plays. So in that sense, I'm very lucky, but like kind of, bridging, like, do I want my own mark on things? And how do I do things that are a little bit different than Lou? And I actually lost my tech director after the first year, who had been Lou's tech director for decades, because he didn't like that I questioned how he worked. Lou had a budget, and then there was always just extra money found and given to Lou. Well, that stopped with me. There is no extra money. It is whatever's there is there, and that's what I have to work with. And it's interesting is before I do any show, they'll be like, "Are you going to stay under budget?" I'm like, "I stay under budget every year." Like, I don't know why you're so, but I tend to reuse stuff and really ask people for stuff. So it's caused me to be very efficient and very conscious of that when I'm thinking of a set or thinking how things are going to work. Like, this is literally how much money we have, so we have to make it work. So I kind of like that as a challenge because it makes me have to kind of stay on my toes with how I'm going to be creative about stuff. The one time we took a main stage for EDTA, and they were like, "Oh my God, we love that you made what is it? The things that they store stuff, pallets. You made pallet furniture." And I was like, well, I wanted something that was very nondescript. I wasn't about to tell them they were all free. Like, it was all free. Like, this, okay, it worked. Like, it was that when that was a trend to make like outside pallet furniture, I was like, and it worked to have a nondescript space to use the pallets. And I was like, but they were free. Like, I had to think of how I was going to furnish an entire apartment, and be able to have it move and things like that. So, taking over a program and finding out, who the relationships were with and, who Lou worked with more, licensing wise than other places, was very important for me and to establish and make the relationships on my own. So I was very lucky that Lou had introduced me to some of the people at Music Theater International while I was an assistant. And then I made sure to continue that relationship once I took over. And just to kind of, network on my own outside of Lou, but always remembering that that's the common thread. So because of Lou, I met Jim Hoare at, Theatrical Rights, and kind of, using that relationship. Michael from Ball State, I actually took a class from him at the International Festival. And he doesn't remember that. I actually took 2 classes with him, and he didn't remember that, but he remembered that I was Lou's former student and assistant. So when I would see him at different events, so it's kind of like I'm always networking and always kind of reaching out to people and touching base. I will say that social media, as much as I hate it, I also love it, in the fact that it, like Jake, it has like kind of connected people, and all the different theater director groups. I needed a study guide for working that MTI had put out, and I like put it on there, and then all of a sudden, all these people are responding. That it's really such a great community to be in, but also to remember that it's also, like every other thing, that's kind of like people being jealous, or people having this, that, and the other thing. So it's kind of been interesting to me, and I've been kind of staying off of it a little bit. We were supposed to, and this is kind of, I mean, I guess, well, you can't put this out there, but because I'll get sued. We're piloting. So we were supposed to do it. And I know it sounds ridiculous. It was one being from Philadelphia. Like, I get it. It's like one of those things, but I saw it with before it closed and it was so good. It sounds so strange, but it was so good. That I actually have been reaching out. In 2017, I guess I went up to New York for a day, and I went to MTI, and I sat down with one of their licensing people, and I was like, we were going through shows, and I was picking for the next year. And finally, he was like, "You're such a pain in the ass. What do you want to do?" And I was like, "Well, what I want to do, no one has the rights to. I want to do." And he said, "We have it." So we were supposed to do it this March. We would be done by this point. So they pushed a year. So I actually didn't have to pull the plug on it. They legally pulled the plug on it on me. So it's what we're doing next year. So like, I'm super excited about that, but I feel bad. But my seniors, then their last show was when they were juniors, and it was Kinky Boots. So I'm like, guys, you kind of can't complain. Well, I mean, you can, but you can't. Like, there's other things in life. But I'll probably do like 1-act plays. And that was another thing, understanding the legalities as a director, whether you're at a community theater or a high school, or, not even a teacher, like just going in. I didn't understand like that you're signing your life away when you sign a contract to direct a show. And then here's a funny little story that's not in the book, that I'll talk about. Lou used to record all the shows and sell them. And when we piloted Rent, a woman didn't get a DVD, so she called MTI in New York to ask for it. That was interesting. So like Lou got the cease and desist letter and like all of this stuff. So all the time people are like, "Why don't you videotape the shows?" I'm like, because I like my life. Like, I'm sorry. Like I get on and I make an announcement about like no videotaping or taking pictures. I was like, and for all of you that think that you're slick, like I sit in the back of the auditorium. Like I see you're not slick. So I'll go up and I'll tap them. I'm like, the second time I got to come up, you're out. Like, this is my life. You're not worth it. Like, you're not videotaping stuff. But so I tell security, I'm like, you kick them out. Like, I don't care. But yeah, and that's the one thing about like social media and stuff. Like everyone, like you can show clips of your show like up through 30 seconds, and there can be so many seconds of a song and all this stuff that like I didn't know. And it's not something, because Pennsylvania doesn't have a theater education program, like you don't learn about. And just the dynamics of, who usually does the choreography. Is it a student? Is it a cast member? Is there someone who's always the lead? That's my favorite one. They're always the lead. I'm like, not here. And that's something that I stress to everyone, and it's what Lou taught me, and it's a fact of life. It's not who's been here the longest, it's who's earned it. So that is something that I feel has to be stressed just in education in general and in co-curriculars and in life. You know, you can have if you have a senior come in and give a sucky audition because they think they don't have to put the work in, and then you have a freshman come in and, you know, knock your socks off. Maybe, you know, they're a little bit like rough and you've got to work with them, but there's something about that entitlement or that want to be part of a show. And I always tell kids, like, it's about the show, it's not about you. And if you can't see beyond that, I don't care how great you can sing. I don't care what your range is. You know, I don't care how many other shows you've been in. Like, that's not going to happen here. And that was something that Lou made very clear. So it's something that I've continued with. And the kids know, like, if you like, don't come in thinking that you've got it, because you don't always have it. And it's a lesson that has to be learned. And I also feel like I had a student last year, he's now at AMDA, and it's funny because he actually called me today. He is loving life. Well, he wanted to be Lola. And he came in, and most likely he was going to be Lola. And then our lighting tech came in and started singing. And we had to get someone new to do lights because he happened to be singing karaoke at someone's birthday party, and they said you should audition for the play. None of us knew you could sing. And he was Lola. So we didn't have anyone to do our lights. We had to train someone new. But my student, he became one of the drag queens. And so I would use him as an example, like how he just embraced, like, kind of like being the head drag queen and making sure like everyone, like, he kind of took care of our little group of drag queens. And they all gave each other nicknames and things like that. And they only referred to each other by their nicknames at rehearsal. And, you know, and then I started just calling them by their nicknames. I'd be like Petal, like Josianica. They all had these like crazy names. And that's what we did. And I made sure to point out to the kids that, like, how much I appreciated that he was heartbroken, but it was about being in the show, and it was about what he could do and contribute to the show that made it better. And I'll never forget closing night, one of the lead drag queens in Kinky Boots pointed out something he had done in the show, and he was like, I could not take my eyes off of you. And I was like, that, like, someone's always watching you. So, you know, regardless, like, you might think I don't have the lead, but someone's watching you, and like, you might be their favorite part of the show. So, I mean, it is always about learning, no matter if it's community theater, high school theater, I mean, you guys know college theater, same thing. Like, there's devastation, and there's cuts, and there's things that don't go the way that you think that you want them to. And I think it's important that it's always learning. And this sounds crazy, I don't let the kids ask me, is that okay, at rehearsal. I tell them, try something. If it doesn't work, you'll know. Like, I'm going to tell you that it doesn't work. But I like when they take the initiative, and I make sure that they get credit that was their choice to make. You know, I'm not like, when someone's like, oh, that was such like a great directing thing, I'm like, I didn't do that. Like, you know, the kids came up with that. Like, I think it's important to do that, because then it just facilitates the program even more. So that when it makes my job easier as a director, if I allow that freedom and they know that I trust them to try something out, it just kind of makes this a give and take more than me. Because sometimes it is stressful to constantly, you know, be like, well, take 2 steps to your right. And I'm like, I can't do that. Like, what feels organic? Like, what feels natural? Like, what would you do in that scenario? Think about how awkward, you know, you are, and what you would do. And like, of course, like, I'll add little stuff in, but I think it's important for me to know that I trust their ideas, and I tell them to trust me at the beginning, because nothing I say makes sense at the beginning. I'm like, I see it in my head. And they're like, what? I'm like, because I'll run or I drive the turnpike 25 miles a day, and I'll listen to a soundtrack, or I'll listen to a play, like if it's an audiobook or on Audible, and I picture it in my head. So then when I'm trying to explain to them, I'm like, you just have to trust me. It's crazy, but it'll work. And then, and I show them, like, I go to the one art teacher. I'm like, okay, this is what I see in my head. Can you like draw it out for my tech director? And he's like, okay. And I don't know how he fully understands my language, but he does. I'll literally go with a drawing with like stick people and he'll figure out what I'm doing. And then I show the kids, like, this is what I explained. This is what he came up with, but that's what I see in my head. Like, I don't understand it. And I will say this to anyone that wants to go into directing: don't ever let someone else pick a show for you. Ever. And the reason why is, particularly if you're in a high school, you might get told like, well, why don't you do this? Because that would be great for the community. No one cares. Because you're the one that's going to be spending 3 months or however long directing the show. And if you don't have like a feel for it, you're going to hate every minute of it. And it just bleeds into the production and it bleeds into the cast and into the work. I had done Catch Me If You Can. And then the next year they were like, can you try to do something family oriented? And I'm like, okay. So I did Addams Family. So I made it as like, I always try to find like the death and the horror and the dirtiness in something so that I can grasp onto some like tangent of life that I can hold on to. So, I mean, her dress was like, was like out of hand. I borrowed it from another high school and they had like fabric in it and I took it out. I had my math teacher take it out. I was like, take it out. And she was like, okay. I'm like, whatever, I don't care. Morticia has cleavage. So we're having cleavage, guys. Everyone has seen it at a pool or on a beach, so they can just get over it. So we did Addams Family and I hated every second of it because I didn't think the show was funny. And the dress rehearsal, I was like, we're done. Like, we're completely done for. And then the audience ended up liking it. I didn't really like it. So then I did American Idiot the next year. So I was like, okay, so I built a runway down the center of the stairs. And I was like, at the start of Act 2, you're ODing in the middle of the audience. Like, it was great. Gorilla Glue looks like heroin. And you just put it in like the little kid medicine syringes at different levels. So so then I did American Idiot, where the, first line is, well, when I was jerking off the other day, that's how the show started. So it was great. That was my last principal's first year, was American Idiot. It was like, what? And, so then the next year I was like, okay, we'll do Honeymoon in Vegas. And then I put Girls with Too Big of Boobs in there. So I did Freaky Friday. I hated every second of it, except there was one song that kind of had some, like a closeted parent, a Fox News parent and stuff. So I kind of like, finding drugs. I kind of like played into that. And I was able to survive Freaky Friday. Every now and then you might have to throw them a bone, but then I have to do a play where everyone's like dead or, something. Yeah, I did Freaky Friday. And then I did a 1-act play of Girls and Boys that Carrie Mulligan had done, where the husband murders her children. It's a one-woman show. It's horrific. But it's like, I have to have balance like in there. So the one thing I've learned is I can't let people encourage me, like what to do, what to direct, or like, oh, we saw this great production at this high school and like everyone loves Shrek. I'm like, great. Do you have $60,000 for me? Like you don't. So just between the backdrops and the costume rentals and like people don't think about all of those things going into a show. So I try to think of what can I reuse? What can I borrow? What do I have? We have some costumes like down in our basement. So, people, it's funny because now people are starting to see like what I reuse and I like it. It doesn't bother me because they're like, well, wait a minute. I'm like, well, that's what you have to do. Like you have to be creative and repaint stuff, repurpose it, because that's how theater survives. You just use it in a different way. So, and again, that's where I think like just kind of being creative. I did a play, The Mourner's Bench, and we flipped like an inside window being like an outside window. I then used that for the inside of the kitchen for Freaky Friday. And then that became the bathroom for Kinky Boots. Like, you just constantly are reusing stuff. They were tearing down one of our elementary schools, and I said, I need a bathroom stall. And they said, what? I said, I need a bathroom stall. Just bring it over. The other day I found a set of lockers in the hallway, and I just pushed them into the back of the auditorium. The kids are like, what are you doing? I'm like, shh, just help me push. Our custodians still haven't found the one ladder to like replace the light bulbs, because that's what, hi Dave, that's what, talk to Morgan. Okay. Sorry. So you can laugh at me. I have a college freshman, a high school junior, and a first grader. So the first grader's like, can I go up front? I'm like, go ask your sister. But yeah, like just repurposing things and being creative. Like that's where, like, again, you have to be willing to ask for help, is to have custodians. That's your number one ally, custodians, and then the secretaries. No one else really matters. Like, I know it sounds crazy, but like no one else really matters, because they're going to be the people that help you out, that when you need to get into the building. Okay. Get into the building longer. Danny, I'm on the call. What do you need? Just go knock on her door. She's in the room. Sorry. So I ask them for everything. And like, you know, if they find anything, if they see anything, to let me in the building at 1 o'clock in the morning, because we're getting back from a theater trip. You know, talking to the local dance studios about costumes that they no longer need. These are little things there. I guess I want to ask if there's any questions, because I'll just keep jumping from subject to subject as we go.
Anyone have any questions they want to throw out right now?
Okay, because I'll just keep talking.
Yeah, if you want to talk about your, like, how you pick the plays or your musicals and stuff like that?
Yes. So the number one thing that I do, and again, it's how I was taught, so I don't know any different. So when I hear different methods, they kind of freak me out. I don't let the students have any input in what I do. So some schools will have their thespian group sit down and talk about like narrowing down show choices. But the reason why I don't do that is because every student, just like I did as a student, is thinking about what role they want to play in that particular show. Or they'll do research on it and watch some horrible version on YouTube and be like, well, I don't want to do that. So I don't let them pick. I let them think they have some like, oh, like, wouldn't this be cool? No, like, I don't ask any opinion. And the number one thing that I do, that Lou taught me, is I never think about what students I currently still have. Because when you do that, you're pigeonholing yourself into limiting what you do. So if I think, well, I've only got 2 really strong males, but I've got 92 females, well, you're not going to make everyone happy. So I just choose a show that I think will have their interest, that will, you know, play to the community regardless of topic, and just kind of go with it. That would be interesting for them to work on. I think my husband's home because I can hear the dogs barking. Can you guys hear them? Because it's annoying.
Yeah, but you're okay.
I'm like, you would think like someone's dying. No, hold on. I'm gonna put them outside. Sorry, I put them outside, so it'll be quieter. When I choose a show, and this is like something that I think of, like right now, I have to think about what shows can I block socially distanced. So I'm trying to stay away from, and I read them in class, but I'm trying to stay away from like Laramie, 26 Pebbles, things like that. Like I'm kind of trying to find some pieces that I think would work. So and it's more of like a high school play, but it's called Cheaters, where the kids are all sitting in a classroom and the teachers are trying to figure out, and they're trying to con the kids who cheated on a test. So this one, I'm like, okay, technically in the play, they're not socially distanced, but I could break up the groups into smaller pods, have them, around the stage. So that's kind of where my head's at thinking now. But typically, I read a lot of plays just from suggestions that I see on Playbill or like in the theater groups online, and Amazon constantly. I have stuff in my cart, so I read a lot of different plays. Now, what Lou did and what I do, because he did, and I didn't realize it wasn't normal. We cut full plays into one acts, so we asked permission to do a cutting. So I never, like, sometimes our kids go to festivals and they're like, why do we keep seeing a lot of the same plays? And it's because there's literally books of one act plays, one act high school plays. And that's what a lot of directors, that's their go-to. I mean, I'm not going to lie. If there's a good, sure thing out there, like, I like it. I'm not going to complain about it, but sometimes I don't need to see, 10 ways to survive a zombie apocalypse, every single year. I read that in theater one, but like to constantly see things over and over again. And kids will say to Truman students, well, why do you guys, do all these plays about like dead people or all these different plays? And it's because we've taken a full play, asked for permission to cut it, and done that. And that's a little bit harder because on a director, that's a lot more work. Is you've got to make sure you're telling the story, that you're not losing major plot points, and how do you keep it condensed. Lou can do it sitting down and just go through it once. He can take a 2-hour play and cut it to 30 minutes one time through. I'm at about, now he did that for a really long time. At this point, I'll do like one cutting, we'll do a read through, and I'll just start marking like what could come out next, to kind of still keep it, going. Like I took a 20-minute cutting of Reasons to Be Pretty to a high school festival, which that was interesting. And everyone's like, oh my God. And I was like, well, I read that play in theater 3, like in my class. So like I constantly just hear what are the key things to kind of keep. And I think that that's something that kind of keeps our students interested, is that it's always going to be current stuff. It's always going to be something a little bit different than what other schools do. But again, like I'll go to theater festivals and internationals, and I'm like writing down like a bunch of the plays that I like and see. And a lot of times it does tend to be plays that are full plays that someone has cut. And I'll never ask them for their cutting because I don't want it. Like I want to do my own, but like I like what they've done. And I appreciate that. Like I saw a cutting of Museum about 1.5 years ago. And I reached out to the director and I said, I really like your cutting. How many times did it take you to go through it? And he was like, I actually didn't end up liking my cutting. I wish I had done the full play. So now I'm reading that thinking like, maybe I'll do this as a full, like it's kind of shifting my mind around. But I do like, definitely like when people ask like for something a little bit different on the Facebook group, like I love seeing all these different plays that people suggest. And I've actually, purchased a lot. So like, for example, I would love to do The Wolves. So I'm actually going to teach that in my theater production class this year because they're all kind of like theater nerd kids and I love it, but I want them to have to focus on the sports aspect of it and the physicality of how you would direct this show. Like having the, because obviously we all hear about triple threats and things like that. Well, now these kids need to be athletically inclined and doing that. And kind of looking at it that way and from a different perspective, but I would love to do that. I wanted to do Lombardi years ago, and I had the football players to do it. And I was like ready to go with it. And I was like, there's just certain things. So when I did Honeymoon in Vegas, I had a math teacher come teach all the kids how to play poker because there was the poker scene. And I was like, people, you don't think so, but people are going to be in the audience. And this is the best thing. And Lou used to say this is, and it's not his quote, obviously, but the devil is in the details. And that's like what I learned from him that really, really carries over. Like I have one problem with Hamilton, and my students all know what it is. And I actually told Jeffrey what my problem was with Hamilton. They do not have liquid in their cups. It infuriates me to no end, the detail that was put into that show, and there is no liquid in those cups. It makes me so mad. And even like up on the set, like they have different like plates and stuff from that time period. The letters are really all handwritten copies of letters. Like it's really a letter that she's burning. And I'm like, and you didn't put liquid in the cups. Like there's things like that. Like I kind of look for like the little details in a show it's going to be what makes a show different than everyone else's. Is they're going to remember something that's slightly different or like has a nod to, someone. Like just like how I said, like playing poker, or like teaching the kids to box. Like you have to be convincing or people aren't going to buy it. And with that being said, that is why I don't think about the kids that I have when I cast, because you could have some kid that might fit the role and can sing, may not be the best singer, but their acting is so amazing. The audience buys it. I don't know. It's just kind of like, I think about when I go see shows and, someone casts a girl because she's like the best singer, but she's like a horrible actress. And I want to bang my head. And I'm like, if this was a choral concert, you've got my standing ovation, but you're standing and you're just singing to the audience. Like there's nothing, you're not moving, you're not selling this to me, but you could have someone that might not be the best singer that just really kind of brings it. And I feel that if you allow and have that flexibility, that's what makes a program or a show great. My vocal director will argue with me about everything I just said. And that's why we work so well together. Because like we'll make deals. Like we'll be in the auditions and he'll be like, I can't with this kid. I'll be like, well, I'll give you this one if you give me this one. And we literally make deals because I'm like, I can't. Like there's just some people that I'm like, if I have to look at that face singing, I wouldn't buy a ticket. Like that, it's just, you kind of get a feeling for it. And it works. But I think when the kids know that you're putting who's best for the show as a whole in versus just who always gets the lead, or, their mom is another teacher in the high school and things like that. Like it's important that who brings it is who gets it. And I always tell people I would rather work with someone who's a hard worker, who's maybe at like an 85% than a diva that's at 100% that is going to make me hate coming to rehearsal and make everyone else miserable. So, I mean, that's also what the kids know too, is that it's like a give and take, and that you have to share the stage. So I double cast and I don't let them know what nights they're going on until right before tickets go on sale. And I also check their grades, because if they have an F, they lose a performance, and their parents know that. And it's not always the seniors that get closing night. And if you get opening, you could get closing. Like there's no guarantee on it. And it's basically, and it's not like a game to do that or like playing with their emotions, but it's like, who's coming to rehearsal on time, who's coming to rehearsal prepared, who's hungover at Saturday rehearsals and is trying to hide like in, the back room when, we're meeting, or who's like going and laying in the classroom on the couch during lunch instead of maybe going over some stuff with our choreographer. If I'm not there and my assistant's there or the choreographer's there, who's like messing around and on their phone at rehearsals. All of this stuff kind of comes into play. So they have to know, like, if you're willing to work, you earn that. It's not just given. And that's something that I think is important, even with adults, is you earn your time and you earn what you get. So like a lot of times people like my principal one of my principals years ago, he said, you're an acquired taste. And I said, I know. And I said, I said, I like it because I don't hide what I do. Like I don't. I'm like kind of loud. I don't wear shoes, so I walk the halls barefoot. It makes they actually changed the dress code 2 years ago that says no bare feet. And everyone's like, that's so awesome that they changed the district dress code literally because you don't wear shoes. I still don't wear shoes, so it doesn't really change anything. But it's nice that they thought that it did. But I kind of like look at it like you may not like how I do things, but I do them well. And I do them for the kids and I do them for the community. And I'm working with parents. I'm working with all of these different entities to put on even though it's a high school, a community show because it's for the district. And you know that sometimes they may not like the method to the madness, but it works. So that's kind of something. And I've had to prove myself. When I got my first main stage at ITS, like I'll never forget. So I was reading it in the secretary's office, like her little cubby, and I opened it up and I started crying. And she was like, "Oh, Tracey, I'm so sorry." I said, "No, I got it." And I was like, because I keep hearing you're not Lou, you're not Lou. Like now I'm doing some of the same stuff that Lou did. And that's why it was so important. I actually had never seen or heard a single song from Kinky Boots when I agreed to do the pilot. I knew about it. Like I knew that everyone liked it. And everyone's like, "You haven't seen it?" I'm like, "No." I actually signed the contract to do the pilot and then went and saw it 2 days before it closed. So I said, I kind of like doing stuff blinds, like again, I kind of like to challenge myself, but I just went to MTI and I said, I honestly don't care what it is. I need a pilot. And they were like, "What?" And I said, I'm asking you for one. And I said, because at this point, I'm feeling a little bit like I had done Freaky Friday. I was ready to like bang my head against the wall. And I was like, I kind of need something to challenge me that I'm not familiar with. And I was like, but I just need to kind of prove myself a little bit more. And that's kind of what I did. Like, and it was a new school board president at the time. And we met and I said, "Listen, here's the show. Here's how I plan to do it, all this stuff." And he said, "Do you see any problems with this show?" And I said, I made one request and they had to get Cyndi Lauper's permission. I didn't want to put the title "Sex is in the Heel" in the program. I just wanted "in the heel" because I didn't want someone to be holding the program that says kinky on the front and open it up and then see the word sex. It sounds silly, but I just didn't want that connection. I said, I'm not changing the lyrics to the song. I just don't want something in print that someone can be like, "Look at what, this high school's doing." Just to give you an idea, the entire meeting sat there looking up different definitions and images connected to the word kinky. That was her concern. And I said, I don't want to change the lyrics or anything like that. I just needed that little, I was concerned, but we didn't change anything. We didn't change. We had a Hispanic Lola. So I actually didn't like what we ended up having to use for in Land of Lola. I can't even remember what the stupid lyric was now. We came up with a whole bunch that like rhymed because Lola wasn't Black. So they wrote Hispanic lyrics and they wrote white lyrics. And we used them, but I didn't like it. I can't remember. I wish I had it in front of me, like what it was. But it wasn't. I was like, whatever, like Lola's not Black. Oh, I'm Black Jesus, I'm Black. So it was those lyrics. I'm trying to think. I'm Black Jesus, I'm Black Mary. What did his name's Romy? I'm gonna have to like look like what Romy had to sing. And I can pull it up on my email. And I was like, oh, like we made all these other suggestions, like based actually on his skin color, because he was kind of like a caramel color. And I was like, what can we like write that like goes with this? And they ended up, she wrote Hispanic lyric and white lyrics, but I can't remember what we ended up having to sing. And he kept screwing it up because from the original one, we got the changes like 2 weeks before we opened. So the whole time he had been singing all the other ones. And I was like, listen, if you like, it doesn't matter. Like if you say the original lyrics, like no one's gonna be like, well, you know what, he's Hispanic, and and be mad. So I'm like, just whatever. But yeah, so that's kind of cool, like when you do a pilot like that, like being able to write stuff and work on it that way. That's what I find interesting. Like for Spring Awakening and Rent and stuff, like kind of reworking stuff and how it works. I'm like, how do I put an ice skating rink on the stage? So that's been a challenge. But I found one thanks to Shark Tank. Shark Tank had this kid on that taught them how to make a ice skating practice rink outside that doesn't melt. So it's like, it's going to be like $500 for me to have a little ice skating rink, and you actually wear real skates on it. So I'm like, how do I do this? And Amazon also makes fake fish tanks that look real. So I'm going to have like 2 real fish tanks and then a bunch of like fake ones, and there'll be real fish in them. I hope they don't die, but there'll be real fish in them. So like, that's why, like, everyone's like, how are you going to do this? I'm like, well, and then it sounds stupid, but like heavy bags are really, really expensive, which I didn't know. But I found that if you get like the army canvas bags in black and fill them with sheets and hang them, they look like heavy bags. These are the little tricks that I've had to figure out along the way. And my vocal director and music director have asked me, they want me to stop using feathers and sequins and glitter and stuff. That's not and the custodial staff has also asked me, and I'm like, no, it's not. And they're like, well, at least with not going to be able to do it. I was like, oh, you have no idea. I'm like, because it has this entire number that is very similar to the sergeant's number in American Idiot, like coming out and like having all the girls. I'm like, oh, there's glitter. Maybe not boas, but there's glitter. But yeah, I usually have feathers and stuff everywhere. And trash picking. I realize in a post-COVID world, that's how I get everything. It sounds ridiculous, but like these Facebook pages, like these buy free, like get stuff. Some woman just was giving away all of these scarves, and I was like, well, she's giving them away for free. So like, even if I use like 3 of them, just kind of, I mean, I get more stuff like when someone's mother passes, I get more costume jewelry, but I got a ton last year. And now I realized I need stuff that's kind of like late 70s, early 80s. And that's what I just got. So, I mean, kind of not being afraid when you see something in the trash. Lou used to come to school and he used to drive a Mercedes, and there'd be like stuff hanging out of the back of his car when he got to school. He's a piece of work, but I realized like that's what I have to do. Like I have to kind of suck it up when you don't have a budget, or you need to, make money to have money to spend, is you kind of have to do these things and figure out what's the most cost effective. And if you're running a high school program, depending on what area you're in, is not expecting kids to be able to buy anything. Like for Honeymoon in Vegas, all the girls had to have character shoes. So we found a website where character shoes were about $35. And I, out of our booster money, gave every girl $25 towards the $35 shoes. Just because like, depending on where you're at, like you can't, like you can't expect kids to go out and, be able to buy their costumes. You always have one kid who wants to buy all their costumes, but I don't require it. I'm like, guys, go in the basement. Like there's a ton of stuff down there. Like you can dye it, you can cut it, you can, do whatever you want with it, and not give it back. But at the same time, like I can't expect kids to be able to buy stuff. So you do have to really kind of be creative in that way. Like we have a rain curtain that Lou bought 2004. I think I've used it in 4 shows. It's one of my favorite things. It's on its last legs. Like there's always like silver streamers. Like I'm like, guys, don't pull on it. Like you know, you need it to last. And just like really taking care of what you have and like storing stuff well and making sure that you're able to do that. Because, you know, even if your program has a ton of money, do you want to keep rebuying the same stuff all the time? No, because when they change, you know, the laws with wireless space, and you know, having to get new mics and there's certain things that you always need to get, you know, spiking tape, mic tape, like, you know, all that stuff. You don't want to have to keep adding different things to it. So I try to make sure that I have what I need, and then what's kind of like a wish list. Amazon has probably, and I hate just, you know, giving Amazon all my money anyway on a personal level, but that has made for me shows so much easier. You know, the fact that you can get stuff just shipped overnight and find, like, it's made things a lot easier to get. You know, again, like theater groups and things like that, being willing to share, like that's helped out a ton. I can't imagine what directors actually did before the internet. Like, like what? Like you had to, I remember the one time Lou and I went to this man's farm in Bucks County. It's actually closing, I think. And we went in the backyard into this barn. It was 2 stories and it was just all costumes, like all clothes. But there was no organization whatsoever. But this man knew where everything was. And that was when we were doing epic proportions and needed like Roman costumes and like needed like very specific things. And we didn't have the budget to, because it wasn't our musical, it was our play. Because I get a budget, I get $22,000 to do an entire year of theater. So that's any plays, a musical, all of the licensing, costuming, props, set, everything. So I did get an extra 5,000 now because our lights were going to burn down our auditorium last year. So we had to take all of the mechanicals were about 20 years old. So we had to take all of the mechanicals down and I had to rent an entire lighting set. And a former student who became the technical director down at Temple University set me up with a lighting company. And that's where, again, like your former students and people that you've worked with, like the worst you can hear is no. So you can't ever be afraid to ask. And it sounds like crazy, but like, what's wrong with asking the local pizza place if they want to put an ad in the program? Because that's where the kids all order their food from. So my kind of philosophy is the worst thing that can happen is they can say no, but what if they say yes? Or if they give, so, you know, reaching out to former students or, you know, using social media. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's something that I do. Like I was telling them that I had a guest speaker yesterday in my Theater 4 class. I had a fetal geneticist from CHOP as a guest speaker in my Theater 4 class about a play that we read to kind of explain some DNA stuff to us. And I literally put on Facebook, does anyone know a geneticist? And all my friends were making fun of me. Like people ask for landscapers, you know, hairdressers, and they're now, you're asking for a geneticist. Well, one of my former students works at CHOP. And, you know, through 6 Degrees, which is everyone in the world, set me up with a fetal geneticist. And she was my guest speaker yesterday. So I always say, like, if I can't find one, okay, but I'll use biology teachers at school. But if not, do that. Like, and another thing is like always reaching out. Like you never know who has an interest in something. I reached out to my social studies department when we were reading Assassins. And I said, I would like you guys to do a presentation about the assassins. And they were like, okay. I went, no. I don't want what's in the history books. Like if you have a fascination about one of the attempts, like whatever, like I want to hear what we're not going to just Google on the internet. So my principal is a former history teacher and he came in and did this whole thing about Garfield and like what people didn't know and all kinds of stuff. And the kids loved it. It was like, he was talking about something he was passionate about. So I think that's kind of important to reach out to people and be like, hey, like, can you, you know, pop in and talk about this? I do a play about 9/11, The Guys. I actually hate the play and that's why I do it. I think it was poorly written and this is my opinion. It plays on the emotions of the time because it was written very quickly after 9/11. And my husband's a firefighter. So I find it interesting that it was all about like a captain. who had to write 8 eulogies. So I had one of my teachers come in who was a stockbroker in New York City on 9/11, and he left after 9/11 and became a special ed teacher, which he says is more stressful than being a stockbroker in New York. But he comes in and he worked in the World Trade Center, and he talks to the kids about that day and about all the artwork that was in the World Trade Center that was lost. And he gives this whole different perspective. So it's always reaching out to other people to kind of see what they're not, you never know. Like, again, one of the math teachers was like, if you ever need any costumes to be sewn, and I just like would bring stuff to her, be like, thank you. Is to, pay people in gift cards and, free tickets and things like that. But it's really reaching out because people all have a connection to theater. It's crazy because you can't find anything else in the world that everyone has a connection to. So either they were in a show, saw a show, liked a show, or remember like a grandparent that used to sing, Bushel and a Peck from Guys and Dolls. Like there's always some connection to theater. So use it. Because people will be like, well, when I was in high school, and listen, you have to smile and nod, and you might not care that they were in Pirates of Penzance, but you're going to tell them that you think that it's great that they were in that and that they were a lead. That's awesome. And you have to kind of, it's like being a politician a little bit. I hated during intermission of the third night of a show, people coming up being like, oh my gosh. So like you feel like you're at a wedding over and over again, like thanking people for coming and hoping they're enjoying the show and listening to like, oh, well, that's, my neighbor's kid. Okay, that's great. Like, just keep doing it, smile and nod, like just keep going with it. Because honestly, I think theater directors are the best actors. But I mean, like you have like these moments. So, it's something to everyone. Again, they can say that they hate theater or that they think it's like a stupid class, but everyone has a connection. Like, I know you're singing show tunes at home, so shut up. Like, it's one of these things that they may not want to admit and be like, oh, I didn't realize that I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. That, kind of like pointing out like all these different things. Like I saw people that are like, I never saw the TV show. I'm like, did you watch Friday Night Lights? And they're like, oh my God, that's great. I'm like, it's the same writer. Like, oh my, it's just like stupid things, like making connections like that. But it's just one of those things that no matter what, people remember going to their high school theater production, liking it, hating it, whatever, but they all have a connect. Does everyone watch TV? Everyone watches TV, movies. Everyone watches Netflix, like, all of this stuff. And you can pick and choose. Like I watched, I feel like when I watched The Crown, Broadchurch, Harry Potter, there's another one. It's all the same. Game of Thrones. It's like all of the same actors. It's almost like when you watch Law and Order and you see everyone that's from New York. You watch everything British. They just use all the same people over and over. Like Bridgerton now is literally using everyone from every other TV show. And I love it. So I tell kids, like, I just did 6 Degrees of Separation in Theater 3, and I make them connect themselves to someone famous, and then I make them connect themselves to Kevin Bacon because he's from Philadelphia. So, and it's just one of those things that you can just keep connecting everyone. And that's how I kind of explain theater, is that everyone's connected and it's just a matter of putting it together. So I think, your approach in using your community and using everything around you really makes people feel part of it and that they've had some success in your show. Even like adding in a scene, like a pizza box from like the local pizza place that everyone's like, wait a second, and like sees it. Just like little nods like that to your local area will make people see that you've tried to make it part of their community. I hated doing Freaky Friday, but they were supposed to strip at a pool. And we used to have a famous fountain at our mall that got closed down. So I went and took photos of it, and I had someone who makes signs blow up the photos. And when the kids get to the fountain, it was the mall fountain. And all the parents that are like my age or younger were like, oh, it's the mall fountain, because that's where we all used to hang out when we were in high school. And it sounds stupid, but it's like, and they had to do the hunt, and I used our video production class, and we did local landmarks as part of the hunt. And we did go into the cemetery and steal a wreath from one of the graves, which is in the show, but it was my best friend's grandmother, so I had their permission. So like, like, we're really in a cemetery, like ripping a wreath off of someone's grave. But it was funny because like I had to put a disclaimer in the program, like we did know the person, and like using a local coffee shop where they have to do shots of espresso, like little things like that. Like I feel like it gives you friends and they remember it. And then you kind of keep getting those people coming back because they want to see what you're going to add in that's a little local touch next. So I think that's something that's really important to do. That's kind of a nod. Everyone knows I put a nod to Lou in every show. So people like to try to come and figure out what it is. And he always knows. He comes in right away. And I'll get a text. He's not supposed to be on his phone, but I'll get a text during the show that he's noticed it. Like his favorite flowers are calla lilies. So I put that in, or there's like a picture, like just little things like that. I feel add to it. And the kids like it because it's almost like, a scavenger hunt that they're trying to find stuff. But former students, like everyone just keeps kind of coming back. And that's what I'm hoping streaming kind of does for students that go far away, like kind of keeping everyone part of a program. So, and I do all the social media for our theater group. I'm obnoxious about it, but I kind of like to put everything crazy that we do out there and our guest speakers so that they see it's so much more than just the play or the musical or the class. Like we have all these different facets of what we do. Like, so I posted about our fetal geneticist, which is completely odd, but like, and I, made sure I put my hashtag STEAM, not STEM. So, everyone knows like just how it's integrated and how we are using it as, cross-curricular with subjects in there. So I think that's important too, is just showing the relevance. When we did American Idiot, heroin's the #1 killer in Lower Bucks County, where we are. So that was like touched upon in there. Like this is something that's affecting our community and that no one wants to talk about, but you all come see a musical. So we're going to kind of, make people think a little bit. And that's what I try to use theater for. That's why I tend to do plays more than musicals that are kind of about things that make people think that they don't necessarily want to talk about, but that it's important. Okay. So unless you have questions.
Anyone have any questions? It's okay if not. Okay.
I always do that with my guest speakers, and I just feel like I just keep asking questions because I think it's like awkward to have silence. Now, are some people theater educators on here and some people are theater majors?
I believe we're all theater educators. Yeah.
That's nice that there's a program. I mean, I kind of fell into it. In New Jersey, I'm certified to teach theater, but not in Pennsylvania where I teach theater. So, and unfortunately, like I don't have anyone yet for when I leave. There's not a me yet. I'm still waiting. There's a lot in school, but there's not a me yet. So I don't necessarily know. Unfortunately, I don't think there might be one because I think I balanced out Lou and we haven't found anyone yet that can balance me out. So.
Well, if no one, go ahead, Skylar.
I was just about to say the same thing. If no one has any questions, thank you so much, Tracey, for coming and talking to us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a very fresh of breath air. There's just like, we're all around the same, like we all run through the same couple of schools here in Muncie, and we all have our own versions of like high school theater. But you as a teacher and just like talking about your program, it's just a fresh breath and new perspective on what theater can be.
Right. And I do want to give this hint to you. Never share your curriculum with anyone. I don't care how well you know them. They want what you created because they don't want to create it. Okay. So when they're like, oh my God, your program is so great, or what do you do in class? I'd love to do that. It's that they don't want to do the work. So it's kind of a backhanded compliment. But I'm also going to tell you something administrative wise. This is my last little teeny bit of advice. So my principals have no idea throughout the generations, even when like Lou's career, they have no idea what we teach. They literally have no idea what we do. So when I list my curriculum, I list it by themes and not play titles. Because what you'll find is people will see the title of a play and immediately have a preconceived idea or notion about it, or they've heard something, or there's like cursing in it, or, you know, whatever. So what I do is by themes. And the reason I do that is because you don't get locked into something if a new play comes out that has the same theme. Or if you discover an older play that has the same theme, that you're not locked into titles so much as ideas and themes that you want to work with your students. So I can mix up stuff every year from different themes. Just like if suicide's one of the themes, well, I could do Dear Evan Hansen, I could do Spring Awakening. You know, there's so many different things that I could do. Columbinus, about Columbine. Like there's so many, these are actually all things that I do. Like there's so many different things to choose from that it actually gives you a lot more flexibility as a teacher, just by doing things by themes and what interests you, because then that's going to be what builds interest with your students. But then also, other than like films and stuff, which that's always a guideline by wherever you were, like if what the ratings are and stuff on films, but it also kind of keeps people at bay from being like too standoffish about what you're teaching. If they see that it's themes and you can tie it into all these other subject areas or parts of history or mental wellness or anything like that, then that's kind of a whole, people look at it differently than if you just list titles, because they're just going to go down the list in Google. You know, and that's not like I wanted to do Clybourne Park and someone told me absolutely not. I would never be allowed to perform that at a state theater festival. But I could do a play about racism against Muslims. So I didn't go. I was like, clearly you've got like a preconceived mindset here, but it's just something, you know, to kind of stick to your guns and what your gut and what you know is right. But watch how much information you put out there to welcome in, because there's always a critic, and you kind of, and I hate saying this, but you do have to develop like a thick skin and know that you're doing the best for your students. But again, if you invite by, you know, publishing that list or sharing that information with others, like sometimes it can like backfire. Like I don't want anyone necessarily knowing what I do. Yeah, I invite them, like obviously they know some stuff I do because I'm very public about it, like that I did Assassins, but you know, just always giving a lot of different choices so a student doesn't feel locked in. Like when we did Assassins, I wanted them to write a new character. Obama, Trump, and Biden were off the list. They couldn't have any of that. It could be anyone throughout history, but then I also said take some of the characters and have a conversation that didn't take place in the play. But I had a mom call school because they were going to be on the terrorist list with the FBI for writing about assassinating a former president. So the principal laughed because he was a guest speaker in the class, so he already knew we were doing it. But it's just one of those things, again, like to invite the community in and ask for help, but in your classroom, know that people, again, your fellow coworkers will be like, oh, they just get to play in there and everyone can have fun in there, and not really understand what you're doing, but what you're doing actually makes their life a lot easier. Just remember that. So thank you.
Thank you.
If anyone has any questions, Jake has my information. So, you know, just to send any, you know, very specific questions. I get a lot from people. There's this teacher in Florida who I've never met, constantly reaches out like for scene suggestions and play suggestions. And so I kind of like it because right now I'm teaching 6 periods a day, but I'm not directing anything. So I kind of like that keeps my mind going and constantly thinking. I always am thinking about the next show, even when I'm doing a show. I'm thinking about what's coming next, just because it kind of keeps that passion there and, you know, what I like to do. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Welcome. Have a great night.
Thank
Bye.
you. You too.
Bye.
All right, you all are free to go. Thank you so much. Our next guest speaker is next Saturday, the 20th at 5. Same Zoom link, but we'll send out another email with all the other information. Thank you all so much for coming.